the disadvantages that culturally we've been told to minimize our presence in the room for so long. We've been conditioned that way. And so, bounce into the room, be big and bold, even if you're physically, a small person. And so yeah, I think that's actually a really important thing.
Well, I'm so happy to be in conversation today with four remarkable women. I'm joined today by Renée MacVicar, who is the Executive Minister of the Canadian Baptists of Atlantic Canada, and by Anna Robbins, the President of Acadia Divinity College, and by Leanne Friesen, the Executive Minister of Canadian Baptists of Ontario, Quebec, and TaNikka Sheppard, who is the brand new General Secretary of the North American Baptist Fellowship. You're not just the first General Secretary of the NABF, you're the first General Secretary of any region within the Baptist World Alliance, which I think is quite significant. So TaNikka, I know that carries a lot of weight of expectation with it. How have you handled that expectation, and what has it been like for you so far? You're pretty new into the role, but what has it been like for you so far as being the first?
So it goes back when I think about the answer to this throughout my life, the way my parents raised me was that I was always representing my family, right? So you walk with this kind of weight, like even when you leave the house, like you are representing the shepherds. So growing up in Akron, how I knew that from elementary school. And I think about that, about what it meant to represent my family. And it put something in me that I always know that I'm bearing the name or a role or something where you're not just there for you, but you are there on behalf of a group. And a lot of blessings and doors that have opened in my life, my other family members have never experienced that before. So when I walk with that, it's helped me to also be me and make sure that I'm not playing into any stereotypes or anything. But when I enter this space, if I bear a burden, it is not only as the first, but making sure I'm not the last. It is trying to fulfill what, like, God, if you open this door, it's so that I can do something. And I want to be true to that something and be true to who I am as a African American woman, to be true to who I am as a shepherd, to who I am as a creative, and to who I am in so many other ways. So when I think about the authenticity that I must bring into the role, I say that is a burden. The responsibility, I believe in excellence because my parents taught me that from a young age, not perfection. And I also try to bring with me a lot of grace for other people, but also knowing that there are certain things that I have to stand my ground on, a level of respect that I expect and that I require. And you asked me how I've been treated. I think it's been overall great. It's a new season. And so I try to walk in who I am and leave spaces better than what I came. So just what was, not knowing, not thinking I got to be better than, but I have to be true too. And that helps me to live how I do and lead how I do.
The journey to this position wasn't like I set out to be executive minister for the CBAC. It really was step by step, just following God's leading, God's call, the leadership opportunities in front of me. I had a real burden to make sure I used my gifts well and allowed for opportunities for the gifts to grow and flourish. And so I just feel like I made moves when God was clear that he was leading, and it presented a greater opportunity to use the gifts and skills that the Lord has developed in my life, and wanted to be found faithful. I didn't want to bury my gifts, bury my energy, bury my times or skills. I wanted to use them to the fullest for the sake of the kingdom, and just found that this role really allowed me to do that. And it was clear God was calling to this role. And so it wasn't so much about gender or being the first. It was, I want to be found faithful, faithful to God's call in my life, faithful to what God is doing at this point in our history in Atlantic Canada and the world. So yeah, it's a little bit about the journey.
Anna, how about you? What has the experience been like for you? And were there people along the way who kind of, I already know the answer, so I'm asking a question I may know part of the answer to, who kind of said to you,
Mm.
you have leadership abilities. You need to exercise them and let those grow. Were there people like that in your life? And what has the journey been like for you in that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways I've always been the first of something, it seems, because when you're a woman in leadership, I grew up in a Baptist church, then, the first woman to be sent from the church for ordination, the first person to be ordained as part of a couple in the, all these kinds of things. You're the first, the first, the first. And so it kind of dulls its impact maybe after a while. I don't know. And in this group, I'm the first of the first, so what does it really mean, to be honest? And so I echo what Renee said about, just seeking to be faithful with the gifts and opportunities that God's entrusted along the way and being willing to step into those. And I never set out, I think at the beginning, I never had this agenda. I'm going to be the first woman to do whatever. I'm just going to do whatever because it seems God's asked me to do that thing. So it's often been other people have reminded me that I'm the first to do whatever it is. Did you know you're the first? Or someone who will come accusingly, who do you think you are to be the first? That kind of thing. You just blow them off because who has time for that? Yeah, so this role was not the first time I've led. I led a school for a little while in the UK as well, and have spent a lot of time there, and have probably always been leading from the time I was quite young. It's just in me to be a leader, and I never argued with God about that. I just said, okay, God, if that's the way it is, then you open the doors and give me the courage to walk through them. And so that's how it's been. And I'm excited to be a first, but it also comes, I think, with a responsibility to continue to make sure that doors are open behind me. Because I think those who were the first, maybe the generation before us, I think it was so hard for them in some ways that to tend to the open door behind them was maybe more difficult or challenging. And so that's one thing I'm really quite committed to. In terms of people who encouraged me, different people along the way. I think because there were so few women in the time that I was coming up through education and so on, so few women in the church who were leaders, that it was really hard to find role models in that sense. And so it was kind of just forging ahead on my own obstinance, I guess. I don't know, a lot of the time. But then there were always people who would acknowledge your gifts, from the time I was a little kid. I remember people would say, Anna, you got to be a missionary. And just learning to step into those things as well, growing up in a very conservative environment where women weren't necessarily encouraged to do leadership beyond a certain level. But I just it never felt like a huge heavy to me in that way, I guess. But there's been a lot of growth along the way.
Leanne, what was your experience like? Was it similar?
It's interesting because it does sound so similar. And I could almost echo word for word both Renee and Anna's words, which was about faithfully saying yes to God has this for me and this for me. When I was applying for this role, people who heard some of my story as I shared at our first assembly, I came kicking and screaming to it, not because I was a woman, but because I said, really, God, is this where you want me to be? The weight of this feels so significant. And it was really, honestly, not until the announcement was made that I was going to be in this role. And the chair of my hiring committee, the president of CBOQ at the time, whose name was Craig Rumble, made the statement. He said, this is a historic moment, as this is the first woman to serve as executive minister and in our country. And I had this moment of, I guess this is a historic moment. And suddenly people were commenting on this. And then I remember when I was ratified, after going into the women's washroom, actually, which is a sacred place, as we all know, and there were women crying. And a couple women said, I didn't expect this to be so emotional for me. And that was really special. And so it was interesting in that moment to go, I guess this is a thing. For me, sometimes this idea of it being a thing that I'm a woman often is surprising to me. I grew up in a denomination, the Salvation Army, that always ordained women, and I always had men and women pastoring together. When I was a teenager, the general of the Salvation Army was a woman. When I was probably 19 was the first time I realized that there were people, this is going to sound very naive, that weren't Catholic that thought women couldn't be pastors. And it was a conversation in a hall at university. And I was talking to this guy my age who I thought was cool. And he said, well, I don't believe women can be pastors. And I remember thinking, well, people my age don't think this, do they? Because again, some of the Salvation Army, some of those traditions just weren't there that held that view, and I'd grown up sort of in this really protected world from that in some ways. So sometimes when I encounter that, it's still this sort of like, right, this is a thing, right, this is a thing. But at the same time, it's such an honor and privilege, and it does come with weight at times. I think it's overly simplistic, I think, to just say, it's always been easy, or, I'm confident in this, so it's okay. I know we would all probably say that, right? Because there's always layers. And even though I was able to quickly find a job when I started looking for one, it didn't mean that there weren't pieces along the way. And then I was hired for this role. So in many ways you could say, you haven't had it very hard as a woman. But there's layers, there's pieces that happen when you're the only woman in the room, or when you're the first. And all the things that means, and the questions that come up because of that, and the realities that you're suddenly discussing because of that. And I know that there's just lots of little ways that comes out, which can be as simple as questions. Like if someone from a church asks me to come and speak, or if I offer and they say, I hope you don't mind, but I think we're going to have to do an interview with you because a lot of people wouldn't be comfortable if you preached. That's an interesting dynamic when you're an executive minister of a church that you're leading. So I always feel respect and support. They're very gracious about it. There's always a little bit of negotiation too that's in there. So it's wonderful. It's exciting to be the first. It feels like an incredible privilege. It feels like a great honor. But it also comes with some pieces that I find I need to be aware of all the layers that also come with that.
So how do we ensure, and I think all of us care about this deeply, how do we ensure that we're not the last? Because often it has the opposite effect, doesn't it? When a different kind of leader comes in, sometimes people are very self-congratulatory. Oh, look at us. We're so progressive in our thinking that we've allowed a woman to lead us. And now we finished that now. So now we can just turn the clock back. So how do we ensure that doesn't happen after we leave our roles? What are some ways that you are kind of actively looking at encouraging more diverse leadership within your circles?
Well, I'm really happy to address that, because it's one of the things I'm really committed to as a leader, is ensuring that diversity doesn't end with me. And making sure that all kinds of diversities are represented, then to represent the whole people of God as we're serving. So I've been really committed to trying to diversify our faculty. That if we diversify the faculty, we'll be diversifying the number of ways that potential students can identify and see themselves in different roles. And I think I've really seen how, we hear representation matters, but I've really seen it manifested in education. There was one particular conference I was at. It was a youth conference, a Baptist National Youth Conference, actually, and different people were presenting, and someone was there who was sharing about ADC, and I could see the students that were browsing through their phones. Then they went off to the website, and there were only two youth of color in the room. And when they saw the video with my colleague Leonard Anderson, who was an African Nova Scotian, I saw their faces change, their whole demeanor changed when they could see someone that they could identify with. And that struck me really, really, I never forgot it. It struck me quite significantly. So it was one thing to know it intellectually. It was really something else to see it. But we also have probably all of us encountered that with women who haven't maybe seen themselves in leadership, but they'll say, oh, this is a safe place to go, or a safe place to be, because now it says that I'm okay if I step forward into this calling. And so I've been really committed to continuing to make sure we have more women on staff, and that we have more diversity on our faculty, and also on our board, because unless it hits the realm of governance in our organizations, those who will perpetuate decisions beyond us, then I think it could get stuck. And we all know that what we've accomplished or reached or have been allowed to achieve thus far is precarious in this world. It's precarious. Mm-hmm. And the best way I can think of preserving it and moving it forward is to make sure that these values are embedded in the institution itself, so that when my time is finished, the things that I'm committed to because of my perspective as a woman, that they're baked in, so that they can't just be undone as soon as I'm no longer in the leadership position. And I think that's been something that I've been really intent to be committed to in this place while I've been here, so that the more doors that are possible for people to step into ministry leadership, whoever they are and wherever they are, that they can see a way forward for themselves if God is calling them.
Yeah, I agree, Anna, and thank you. You've said that so well. It has to go beyond us, and not just for the sake of representation, but because they're qualified, skilled, valued, diverse voices who for far too long haven't been invited around certain tables. And so we have a long way to go in the CBAC in this area of greater diversity. And so, like Anna, I think about how do we make sure any opportunity we have to invite people in, we're inviting in diversity of voices. So boards, committees, staff, but even things that aren't so systematic, like the speaking opportunities we have to fill at our assemblies or other opportunities, working groups that are working on some new initiatives. How can we make sure there's diverse voices on those teams? Some of the vision work that we do, making sure a diversity of voices are around the table, because that's what's going to help ensure those voices are continuing to be valued and invited into the future. So trying to think about every opportunity, how do we make sure there's a diversity of voices, because that will only enrich the kingdom conversation.
I would add that part of being a person who often brings diversity, I guess, to a space is I learn a lot about things, even tables, when you get to tables of authority, right? I call them table manners, and they're different for different spaces. But what I try to do, I have a passion for leadership development, is the little things that were not taught to me as a woman that maybe I see my brothers brothers in leadership, that's what I call them. They pick up because they've been mentored and they've just been exposed, that I try to make notes of those things and share them with others. And so they're ready to operate in these spaces. And so for me, discipleship is a lifestyle. So I share what I know so I can help prepare others to operate in these roles. So they are not, it's not awkward for them. And so not only am I operating in this space, but I'm trying to prepare others, while also, I love what Anna said, like making sure that we create spaces that, in my word is say, normalizes diversity in the way that people start to wonder, like, wait a minute, we should have it this way. It should be this way. And this is not special. I don't want how I am to be special because I'm a woman or a person of color. I want it to be so normalized that when there's not that, people see, is there something, and they begin to question, and it begins to do something in their spirit that something's wrong with this. Why is it this way? Should it be, or is there something that we need to fix? And then the reason I do this is, I would say, is I look at leadership as a relay race. I'm already preparing to hand the baton off the moment I take it. And so that, I think, is just a part of like how I operate, and I'm trying to show others how to operate as well.
As leaders, we have so much scrutiny anyway as to how we lead, the decisions that we make, the ways in which we model the things that we ask our staff to do, or that we're hoping to inspire other people to do. I guess my question is, do you sometimes feel a bit of hesitation to rock the boat too much? Do you feel as though, as a woman leader, I'm even being scrutinized even all that much? I see Anna laughing because clearly Anna doesn't feel that pressure. But does it sometimes give you pause to think, oh, I don't know how this is going to be received, even though if you were a man, you may not have that same hesitation?
I don't feel that way personally. And there's a piece that I think is interesting to comment on. It's interesting dynamic that I have often, most of my ministry, been one of the only women in the room working in evangelical circles. But I have a personality as such. I have a big personality, maybe some would say, or strong personality. I'm talkative, I'm outgoing, things that, and I've always been willing to sort of meet men head to head, so to speak, and kind of meet them on a ground that I think we can connect on. And so that's been a space I've always been comfortable. And one of the things I would hope that I feel like I still haven't seen is I would love it if women who are other types of women could also feel they could be in rooms with men. Women who don't have perhaps personalities like mine. I'm wondering what it looks like for them to also find room in those spaces. I think that's a growth area that we have. Sometimes there's lots of ways that we kind of just jump in, and I think sometimes the filter would be helpful. I mean, as we know, poor Jennifer and Renee, we've joked with our co-professor Rob that he did not anticipate talking about menopause as many times as he has in the last year. And so sometimes I think a filter might be a little bit helpful for me. But at the same time, I really care about bringing the fullness of women's experiences to the table and not being ashamed of those things and not being afraid to say things like, this is something that happened to me today, or this is my reality, or what it's like to be a mom, what it's like to be a wife, all those pieces, to show up wearing a bright pink suit and be like, yeah, because actually, I really like pink. And that's okay. And so what it means to come and do that in a full way is something I do often try to balance and figure out, but also be saying, but I do want to bring the fullness of that. And I hope women can bring the fullness and men of all the pieces they are too, would be something I'd hope.
Thanks, Leanne. Yeah, I would feel this similar to Leanne, and I don't have a fear of rocking the boat. I think because I feel like part of the call to this role and the affirmation of the assembly was because they were saying, we want this boat to be rocked. We're giving you permission to bring big changes. And I feel more the responsibility to make sure I do that, because I feel like that was a vote for change, and that they want a new day, they want fresh leadership, they want courageous yet humble leadership, that they're looking for change. So I feel that. And then thinking what you shared, Leanne, I hope too we create more spaces for women to be who they are. But when I think about being the first, um, I do think it takes grace on our part for how others are adapting to a new leader. And some of it is just a new leader, and some of it is their first experience of a female in the lead chair. And so some of the rocking the boat has simply been learning, in particular, male colleagues, maybe older male colleagues, how they need to be led and how they respond to my leadership and how to lead them well. And so I don't really see that as rocking the boat, as learning how to lead your team well. And whenever you're the new leader, it's an adjustment for everybody to figure out a new leader and their vision and their direction, and how to work well together and bring out the best in each other, the best in a team.
I don't rock boats by intention. I think I've stepped into too many rooms where my very presence has been seen as rocking the boat. There's other phrases for it that have been used, and you probably they've been used for you too. But simply by being the only woman in a room, sometimes you're rocking the boat, and because you've dared to be in that space, and then if you then go on to actually lead in that space, oh, good heavens, that boat is just ready to tip over. I mean, we've all had stories, right, of times when just your presence has rocked the boat. Anyway, I went to this conference and there was a group of men standing there talking. And mostly at conferences, if there's a gaggle of people there, you kind of, swan up to them. Hi, what are we talking about? Kind of thing. And I did this, and this one man swung around. He looked at me and he looked me up and down. And he said, "You can't talk to me. My wife is over there." And I had never been talked to in such a way in my life, but I realized in that moment that my very presence was rocking his boat in a way he didn't want rocked. So if my presence rocks boats, I say let it rock, and I'm happy to be in that space, happy to continue to lead just because God's asked me. But I will say this though, when I was first meeting with the committee who wanted to offer this role to me, and I met with the board, and I said, I want the board to be clear that if you do go ahead and appoint me to this role, there will be times that will be a detriment to the college and not an asset because of certain expectations that might come. And there have been one or two occasions where that's been the case, but I wanted them to know and to own that if they're stepping into this space by offering me the role, that they're stepping into it with me. and that the very fact of my presence will sometimes be boat rocking, and they would have to step into that with me and not kind of stand back and say, hey, not on us. And so it has been that way. It's been a really positive experience. So I just think we shouldn't shy away from that. I think we should own it and be glad and enjoy the ride. It's fun to rock the boat. It's a little exciting sometimes, but I never do it by intention, but I'll sometimes finish a conference or something. People say, oh, you really rocked that boat, didn't you? And like, did I really? But yeah, praise the Lord.
Yeah, that's so good. So good. I would say for me, the reality is the roles where I've been the first woman, I think that most of them, honestly, I don't know if you would keep this, but honestly, the organization or the situation was in such a position that people probably thought, well, now a woman can have it, if I'm honest. So, well, what is she gonna mess everything up? And that's just been the reality, unfortunately, of the situation. So there's an expectation that for my coming in to improve things, where I run into probably it is boat, rocking a boat, but it is what I call the transformation paradox, where people are saying, we want you to bring change, we need change, but they never expect it to be the changes that I do often. And so it's like, bring this great change, but do it in a way that makes me comfortable. Bring change, but do it in a way where, it doesn't change what I would like for you to keep. So I often really run into that, and I'm usually prepared, sometimes not. But as I said before, I bear a weight with me, and it is to be true. At the end of the day, I want to be able to say to God and myself, I tried my best, I did my best, and I was true to what I felt was the right thing to do and to be. And if that makes people uncomfortable, well, I would say so did Jesus. Oh well, it's my Christian call.
I'll just add one story. I've many, but I'll just add one. I was once on a Zoom call, and it was with all these different leaders of different denominations. I was the only woman on there. I think it was from 25 guys. And then they made us go into breakout rooms. And this one guy said to me after, I don't know, we were talking about some topic, he said, you are a smart young lady. I was like, gee, thank you. Like the element of surprise that that wasn't what he was expecting.
And it's interesting because people don't often. I was at an event once with CBOQ, which ordains women, and it was for pastors of our larger churches. So they'd gathered pastors who were the pastors of the lead pastors of the largest churches. This is when I was still pastoring, obviously, and I was the only woman. And so kindly, I think I stopped counting at 6 men who took me aside and said, listen, I just want to say I'm really glad you're here. And I hope you won't feel uncomfortable. And if anyone says anything to you, I just really want you to know that I have your back. And I thank you, that's so nice. And then I had this moment, each time I was like, oh, but you're still naming that. It's strange that I'm here. This is kind, but yet you're still saying, oh, this is noticeable and this is odd. And I want you to know that I'm here for you. And I'm like, I wasn't feeling strange until this moment, time number 6. So it is interesting, even the ways of kindness that it gets names that you're like, people are noticing the difference and they're naming something, even in support, because it was all very kind, how at a place that can feel. So maybe as we're out there and other colleagues, men and women, are seeing it and naming it, I think that becomes important too.
But I would say quickly, one thing that I don't live in titles and things like that, but I think appearing younger than I am is very helpful sometimes, and I like it. But I have had so many people call me girl that it is crazy. And so this one guy was calling me girl, and I asked him, and then he did this young lady type interchange, and I just said, you know what, I really don't like when you call me that. So he said, okay. Then he came back, and then he said it again, like, okay, young lady. And so then when I say, remember, I told you I don't like to be called that, and I don't flex probably ever, but he was like, well, I don't know what to call you because my sister is older than me, and all women love being called young. And I was like, oh, okay, well, you now have two options, actually three. You could call me Dr. Sheppard, Reverend Sheppard, or you
Amen.
have to Minister Sheppard, but use one of those moving forward. And I don't like to say stuff like that because I don't need the titles, but it was such an appalling thing that I thought, why do I
Thank
have to
you.
tell this man 3 times not to call me girl? And I don't like it. And that was just one of those things where I put my foot down and I just keep putting it down. I don't like people to call me girl, young lady, any of that stuff.
I did say this year, and I'm happy with this year. I said to my husband, which is interesting. So I'm 5'6", and I never wanted to be tall, and I never cared about being tall or short or whatever my height was. And it was interesting. I said to my husband, and I can't wear heels because I injured my hip a few years ago. And I said, there's so many times when I know I'm going into a room that I wish I could wear the biggest heels I could find. And I wish I was taller for the first time in my life. I just want to have, because often, besides being the only woman, I'm so much shorter than everybody. And I know that that sounds silly, but it makes you feel smaller. I don't know if you've ever felt that, ladies. And I never heard myself say, oh, I wish I could wear like these 6-inch heels. I just want to be bigger. I think it says something, that sense that we're trying to figure out, or I'm trying to figure out how my space can feel equal in the room, or less conspicuous.
I'm always the biggest person in the room, and it really has nothing to do with your size, how they will
You
treat
know?
you as a woman, because I'm both tall and wide. So you can't really miss me in the room. But it does have its advantages in some ways, because culturally women are taught from the beginning to diminish your size. And so pull yourself in. Your body language is to minimize your place in the room, cross your legs, humble yourself down. And I can't remember her name. I wish I could. You're going to have to look her up. But she gave a TED Talk some years ago, and she talked about how it actually psychologically prepares you differently for a meeting if you feel big for a while. It's an evolutionary thing. And she would say, and I've shared this with my staff, actually, who wanted to go into meetings, and I'd say, go into the bathroom, stand up and stand with your arms in the air for 3 minutes. And when you go into that room, you're going to feel bigger, psychologically bigger, and you will fill that room in a whole different way, because we're so used to being, make yourself small, don't point yourself out, and they do it now. I think some of them have carried on doing
How
that.
did you practice?
Yeah, absolutely. And it says something, it releases something in your brain that gives you much more confidence and much more space in the room. And so I think being physically small is not the disadvantage. The disadvantage is that culturally we've been told to minimize our presence in the room for so long. We've been conditioned that way. And so bounce into the room, be big and bold, even if you're physically, a small person. And so I think that's actually a really important thing.
All right, I think we're going to wrap it up, and I'm going to ask one last question, and maybe I'll start by answering first, which is I'm going to give you one opportunity to have one line, because I'm well aware there are lots of younger women that are going to be watching this, and in us, they see possibility for themselves and for other women in their lives, that they could also be in roles of leadership one day. The number of young women that reached out to me when I assumed my role was astounding to me. Women that I didn't know, I sent me messages or called me, left me messages saying, I saw you about your appointment. I never thought it would happen in my lifetime. I'm so inspired that to see that Canadian Baptists are moving in this direction. And I think you could insert the name of whatever organization when they see us in these roles. And so if you had the opportunity to just say one thing to a woman that is watching this today, what would that be? And mine is going to be related to what both Anna and Leanne have just talked about, which is never allow yourself to feel like you need to be invisible in any room.
There's so many things that I could pick, and just kind of broadly, but I'm going to go kind of a little more specific, Jennifer, in terms of sometimes what people say, and specifically people who feel called to be pastors. I'm going to take a moment in that one, and maybe they've been raised with a complementarian background, or there's a scriptural struggle. I will always say, spend time in scripture and be fully scripturally persuaded, which I believe when you spend time in scripture, you will be fully scripturally persuaded of your call. Because when you're out doing that funeral or that wedding, and again, those of you in ministry will have that, and someone's going to come up that you haven't even met before and say, how do you justify this in the Bible? You don't ever have to answer it, but so that you can know with confidence in your own heart and in your own call. And so that's something that I would say, take that time to study and feel so confident and persuaded that you have been scripturally called and released and empowered and allowed to serve in those roles. And I think that will carry you very far.
I would say yes, even if your knees are knocking and your heart is pounding. Say yes. Don't bury gifts. Don't shrink back. I think especially sometimes as women, our self-confidence can have taken hits. And so often it takes great courage to say yes, but say yes to whatever the next step is in using your gifts, and particularly a leadership gift. Say yes and use that gift. We need the leadership gifts of women in the kingdom and in the world. So say yes, even if your legs are shaking.
Go and be fierce, but keep your heart tender towards Jesus, because I've seen so many women come out and be hurt and become bitter and become estranged from the kingdom because of that. And so when the hurts come and the pushbacks occur, because they always will, bring them in prayer to the Lord and process them that way, so that your heart stays tender and open. And as Jesus gives you those opportunities and the doors open, just walk through them, and with that kind of fierce graciousness that we've been talking about.
Above all things, lead with love, be free, create space for equity and justice, and be your courageous, amazing, beautiful self in all spaces.
Love it. I love that as our conclusion. Thank you to all of you so much for joining me today for this conversation as we celebrate International Women's Day. It is a privilege to be able to lead alongside all of you. Thank you.